Good evening all, and welcome. Just a heads up, tomorrow is my birthday, and I will be doing a birthday live stream around, 3 o'clock UK time? 9 a.m. States time? In some parts anyway, early States time. So yeah, keep that in mind. Hope some of you guys show up. But now, without further ado, it's time to go to one of my favorite places, haunted houses. So relax and let the darkness take control. This happened to me when I was around middle school age. I can't remember the year, but I was quite young and was staying the weekend at my grandmother's house with my dad, as it was his weekend to see me. My parents are divorced, so I would travel to South Carolina to see my dad every other weekend at that time. That day, she had decided to take us to see her sister, my great aunt, who lived alone on an old plantation that she rented out for large wedding venues. The land is a sprawling plain, with the main house at the top, a barn several dozen feet beside it, and an outside bathroom that looks more like a mini home with a porch. There are walking paths between these and are relatively close. It was my first time coming to the property, and I was excited to explore. My aunt showed me around the large old house, explaining that there were guest rooms for the bride and rooms for her family and the groom's family to get ready for their wedding. She eventually mentioned that because the house was so old, there was a ghost living on the property. She had asked a medium to do a reading of her home once, and revealed that there was a young man named Isaac who was a slave on the property hundreds of years before. He had been working late at night, without a candle or lantern, and had fallen into the well and died. While showing me the outside grounds, among showing me the barn and the bathroom, she showed me the crude flat stone marker on the edge of the woods of her property, where he was allegedly buried according to the medium. They had simply covered the well with dirt and placed the stone over it. There are no records proving this to be the case that my aunt could find, but the activity she had experienced in the home begs the difference. At this point, the adults were all inside the house talking and drinking coffee. I decided to wander and explore as I planned. I pet the horses on the edge of the fence and ran into the yard and decided to take a bathroom break in the outside bathhouse. Both the men's and women's restrooms were spacious, containing a shower, a large sink, and a toilet. So I sat and was ready to get back up and go outside when all of a sudden, without warning, 5 loud bangs rang against the door. It scared me so bad. Before the last bang, I had already begun to shout, "I'm almost done, I'm getting out now." And in one quick motion, I stood up, pulled my pants up and yanked open the bathroom door to find no one was there. I looked across the field at the men's restroom and didn't hear someone go in there. But it made sense if someone really needed to use the restroom that badly, they would have gone there instead. But I didn't hear a door slam, as I had ran to the door so quickly, with less than a 5-second interval, that if they had tried to make a break for it, I would have heard, as you would have had to stomp on the porch and slam the door closed behind them. I called out but no one answered. I ran down off the porch and stared dumbfounded at the bathhouse. I circled the house but there was no one around. At this, I was completely spooked, and ran back to the main house and told my great aunt and grandmother what happened. My aunt rubbed my back comfortingly, gave me some chocolates, and sat me on the dinner table. "It happens more than you think, dear. Isaac likes to pull pranks." While I ate my chocolate, she explained how home renovations have been halted, as the workers would have their tools thrown at their heads or paint cans toppled over. Doors slam, and men swear to never come back and finish working. Times where she was out of town, and the stereo system in the barn would turn on full blast in the middle of the night, leaving the neighbors to call the police just for them to show up on an empty property with no one in sight. He seems to hate when the house is renovated or changed. There was one time where a couple was staying in a guest room, and even though it was summer, they could not go to sleep as the room was frigid cold. My aunt would run up and down the stairs delivering blankets to the couple, and though she understood what was happening, she wouldn't dare tell them. Isaac must have been in that room with them. This experience has left me questioning my skepticism in the paranormal. I can't understand how this could have happened. I've even asked my dad earlier this year if he remembered visiting, or if he had tried to prank me by banging on the door, but he couldn't even remember what visit I was talking about. I've plundered every avenue of exploration for the sound, but nothing comes up, other than the sure fact that someone definitely knocked on my door that day. The home is used for family gatherings for my dad's side of the family, and honestly, I'm dreading going back again after that experience. I haven't been back since then, but I'm sure Isaac will remember me and pick on me again. My uncle was at his sister's house. Her grandson was going to run to get food and asked my uncle if he wanted to tag along. He said he did, but he needed to put shoes on, and he would meet him upstairs in a few minutes. So the grandson walks down the hall and my uncle starts putting on his shoes. He looks up and sees the boy down the hallway just standing there staring at him. He tells him again he will meet him upstairs, and the boy turns and walks into the bathroom at the end of the hall and starts combing his hair. My uncle finishes putting his shoes on, and when he looks to the bathroom, the boy is closing the door. He figured he needed to use it, so he decides to wait until he gets out and keeps watching TV. So he waits and waits and waits. Half hour goes by, so my uncle decides to just go up and wait for him upstairs. He gets up there and finds the grandson had left a long time ago. A few minutes later, the grandson is back. My uncle is totally confused and asked him when he left the bathroom. The boy had no idea what he was talking about and said he never combed his hair or anything. On top of that, the boy gets a little freaked out and shares his own story. One night he had stayed in the house and got up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water from the kitchen. His grandmother was sitting at the table, no lights, totally still. He stood there for a minute and it felt weird to him, so he walked back to his room. On his way back, he looked into his grandmother's room to see her sleeping in there. I guess my aunt has no idea that these things happened. They don't want her to be scared in her own home. But seriously, what the hell? When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went to was the Myrtle Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There were all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something. I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I started to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a few times, I began to look around for the source of the noise, but didn't see a piano, although I kept hearing it. I asked one of my friends who was standing near me if they heard it, and they said no. When I heard it again, I said there it is, and that they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me, and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there, and that he played the piano, and multiple guests have reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as well as we were leaving the room, and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son hadn't heard a thing. I'm from Victoria, Australia, and when I was little, I lived in a small town with my 3 sisters, one of which was my twin. Not that it's important, but it adds context. My mother was also with us, but she and my father were divorced, so it was just us. My father has always stood by his encounters, of which he believes to be a ghost. He lived there for a very short time before he and my mother split, so he had very few experiences to regale me with. One night, he was sleeping next to my mother, and he kept hearing her whisper, and it was bothering him, as he had to get up early for work, so he told her to be quiet and let him sleep. A few moments later, he felt her right next to his ear, and her breath brushed his earlobe, and he turned over in frustration, ready to tell her off, but his mouth remained open, as she was dead asleep and silent, as still as the pillow she lay. He was stunned, and when he asked her about it the next morning, she had no idea what he was talking about. Another time, when we were all young, he had put me and my sisters all to bed and sat out in the living room and watched the TV. Then a little while later, he heard running up and down the hallway. He assumed it was us mucking about and not staying in our beds, so he got up and walked up the hallway to our shared bedroom and saw we were all fast asleep. We were little children and definitely would not be convincing actors, as he knew we were definitely asleep. A chill went up his spine, and he kept running up the hallway, and every time he checked, we hadn't moved a muscle. One thing I remember is waking up to the feeling of being shoved out of bed. I recall feeling pushed very hard out of my single bed, so hard I actually landed a few feet away, and my side hurt when I got back up. Of course, being a child, I didn't even know what a ghost was, but I was certainly confused, but went back to sleep, as my sisters were asleep, and there was no one there to have possibly shoved me out of bed in the middle of the night. Years later, in a completely different house in a different town my family and I moved to, I had heard the story that a man hung himself in the shed outside. That was creepy enough, but I had no choice. From the very first night I stayed there, I felt a feeling of dread, and like I was being watched. I felt extremely uncomfortable. Most nights, all of us heard the shed door banging all throughout the night, even though it was shut. So my mother placed a large rock in the front of the door, so it couldn't bang against the metal of the shed. But somehow it still created loud bangs every night. My mother was not a very responsible mother, and I would be left on my own a lot in this house when she and my sisters went out. I always felt a little scared, but I had our 2 terriers with me to keep me company. One winter night it was freezing, and the house had no central heating. I was 13 at this point, and had watched my mother light fires multiple times, so I took it upon myself to get a roaring fire going in the fireplace. I was quite proud of my effort, and the living room heated up nicely, and I watched TV and sat there most of the night. My bedroom was freezing, so I decided to drag my mattress out and sleep in the living room where it was warm. I laid down with my eyes closed and tried to fall asleep, but I had that feeling of being watched. I tossed and turned on the mattress and patted my dog that was next to me. It was all silent besides the crackling fire. The light orange glow illuminated the room as a soft yellow, and I looked up at the ceiling to try and lull myself to sleep. I shut my eyes again when suddenly I heard footsteps coming from the left of me, all the way near the front door, which was about 7 meters away. I froze on the spot after looking towards the door and saw no one, but I still heard footsteps that then turned into running. The room was darker now, as the firelight started to dim. The footsteps were so clear, it was as if they were right next to my head. They ran towards me and I grabbed my dog and rolled over in fear, and clutched my dog with a fierce need of protection. Nothing happened. It sounded like they ran right up to me and then just disappeared. I was petrified. My chest quickly moved, and I could hear my heart thrumming quickly in my head. I wasted no time and grabbed my mattress and dragged back to my bedroom and made my bed and shut my bedroom door and laid in it. I had no cell to call my mother, so I had to put up with the fear. Half hour after settling down in bed, I started to calm down. That was until I noticed my dog sitting at the end of the bed with his ears pricked up and his posture very stiff and his head cocked, like he could hear or see something. I heard my door creak open and my dog started growling. I yelled at my dog to shut up and huddled up in the blankets. I heard my door creak again and knew it was open. My dog's head followed something I couldn't see. I ignored my fear and screamed to nothing, "Leave me alone!" And I ran to my door, which I suspected open. I had no idea how it was open when I shut it. I slammed it shut, ran to my bed, grabbed my dog and held him close. And after what felt like hours, did I fall asleep. Nothing happened after that, but the shed door still slammed every night, and nothing we did stop it. I also have a younger cousin who was extremely close to my great-grandmother who died when she was barely a year old. My nana loved her very much, but my younger cousin was seen talking and laughing by herself and talking to no one. Well, at least, no one you could see. She was a toddler when she was asked who she was talking to, and she'd say, "Nana Duncan." This would creep her parents out no end. It happened in the back of cars, and she'd also claimed to be talking to my great-grandfather, who she'd never met, as he sadly died a long time before she was born. She would say, "Poppy Duncan," and say, "He says he misses you." This would happen quite often, and my whole family believes my great-grandparents visit her after their physical selves have left. Another creepy thing involving the same cousin was my father sleeping downstairs at my grandparents' house. The second story was underground like a basement, but it was just another living room with an ensuite. My father had a nightmare in that room, that it was covered in snakes. He woke up and didn't mention it to anyone, as it was unimportant to anything. Later that day, my cousin visited her parents. She turned to my father and pointed downstairs and said, "There's snakes down there, aren't there?" she said with a laugh. This shook my dad. He told my grandparents what happened, and they were all baffled on how the young girl knew what he had dreamed of, or was it just a mere coincidence? I don't believe it was. These are mine and my family's strange experiences. I have no idea what to even call my young cousin, but it's certainly creepy. When I was growing up, I'd be walking down the hallway and feel something touching my shoulder. I'd turn around and nothing was there. One time I was playing A Link to the Past and saw this shadowy head peek around the corner. I freaked out. My mum was in the kitchen, the room where the shadowy head came from, and said nothing was there. My dad would read bedtime stories to me, and we would hear knocking. I always thought it was him doing the knocking. I knocked on the bedframe a few times to mess with him, but remember hearing the knocking as well, and he swears it wasn't him. We moved out a few years and moved back in. My first or second night, I woke up to see the bright lights right outside the house. It looked like the moon, but it was far too bright. I also remember it being right outside the house, not behind things like the moon should be. This one could be a dream, but I specifically remember my parents mentioned the fact that I woke them up in the middle of the night to tell them about this random thing that happened. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a dream. We sold the house and moved out. I remember laying across in my bed from my parents' room as we downsized one morning, and I was trying to get back to sleep. I had woken up to take a leak, but my parents were up and talking, and I heard my dad saying about how he was pretty sure the house we used to live in was haunted. Oh, and the house I grew up in burnt down. The lady who bought it had kids, and one of the kids burnt it to the ground. When I was little, my parents divorced, and I went to live with my dad, as he was moving to a new town. We ended up buying this big house out in the country, outside a little podunk town. This house was huge for the two of us, but it was right on a little pond with an island, so it was cool. There were other houses around, but it was basically surrounded by cornfields, which scared the hell out of me because of the movie Children of the Corn, which had just come out, and it still terrifies me to this day. Anyway, freaky stuff started happening almost immediately after we moved in. On Halloween, my dad and I brought this huge pumpkin, carved it, and put it in the front window. We went out of town one night, and when we came back, it was smashed in the middle of the living room, 10 feet from where it was sitting. I didn't think much of it because my dad played it off, but I then heard him on the phone with his new girlfriend later that night, saying how freaky it was. He moved on pretty quick after Mum, straight player. Weird and random noises happened pretty much every night, and we just grew used to it. Even voices started, but my dad always told me it was the house settling. I have never heard a house say the name Jeffrey, even when it settles. That was when I would always hear someone calling out. But then there are 2 messed up instances that happened that first scared us into selling the place. Even years later, my dad still talks about how it freaked him out. The first was the night when we had a really bad storm. I was 10 or so. My dad was done letting me crawl into bed with him anymore, so I had to brave that on my own. It was about 3 in the morning, and this storm had been raging for a few hours. We hear this loud boom from the first floor. Both of our rooms were on the second, and then we hear glass shattering. My dad yells at me to stay upstairs and he goes down to investigate. He came back up 20 minutes later and tells me to go to sleep. Turns out our bay windows had been blown out during the storm. The freaky thing was all the glass was outside the house, not in shards in the room. He got it fixed the next day and never mentioned it again. The second was when we had to pull down the attic that was in the hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom. One night I woke up to go to the bathroom, and as I was walking down the hall I ran into the hanging attic door. My dad was sound asleep in his room, so it freaked me out. However, as I was walking back to my room after my piss, I ran into that door again. I heard some rustling going up on in there, and figured it was my dad, so walked past it towards his room, but he was in there snoring. I freaked out and told my dad. He got up, turned on his bedroom light, all angry at me. We both looked into the hall, and even though the hallway light was off, we could tell the attic was now closed. My dad was pissed, told me to go to bed and turned off the light. To this day, I still turn on every damn light upstairs of my current house when I have to pee, much to the dismay of my wife. We moved soon later, and I have never gone back to that place. About a year ago, my family and I were visiting with my dad and stepmom. She was actually the girlfriend from the original story, and we got to talking about the house and how it tormented me. My stepmom said she stopped going over there because of all the weird haunting stuff. My dad said he never told me growing up because he knew it would scare me, but he knew the house was haunted. He said the house used to be in town, but when the widow who lived there finally died, the new owners decided to move it out to the country on the land by the pond. He said the day they moved in just happened to be the old lady's funeral. He said they purposefully drove the house by the graveyard as they were having the cemetery, and stopped and opened the front door to let her spirit back in. That's messed up. Anyway, the new owners didn't stay there long, and my dad bought the house shortly thereafter. And that explained a lot as to why so many strange things kept happening. About a year ago, I moved into an apartment complex that was fairly new, so it can't be haunted because it's not old, right? First few weeks I stayed there, I didn't have any issues, but about a month after I started living there, I began waking up in the middle of the night, around 1 or 2 a.m. to a man standing in my hallway. He wore a white t-shirt and jeans and looked like he was probably in his 30s. When I saw him standing in the hallway, I would bolt out of bed yelling, "What the hell are you doing here?" But by the time I reached it, he would be gone. And because I was a bit stressed at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Having grown up in a haunted house for real, I was accustomed to strange things happening, but I had never seen a full-bodied apparition with a face and clothes in such detail, so I figured it wasn't an apparition. I figured I must have been dreaming, and was probably one of those stress-induced dreams where I didn't recognize that I was dreaming. This happened 3 or 4 times over a 2-week period. In general though, even when I didn't see a man standing in the hallway, I would still wake up at around the same time every night. At the end of this 2-week period, I was pretty tired. Then after the 2-week period, it stopped. I stopped walking in the middle of the night and didn't see any random dudes in the hallway. I went to a friend's house for Sunday dinner at this point, tired, but other than that, all was normal. I'm really close to my friend's family and her parents are basically my parents, and I go to her parents for advice when I need it. Normally I'm the one to pull them aside when I'm struggling, but this time her dad pulled me aside and asked if I was alright. I said I was fine, but stressed, and other than that life was good. He had a pretty intense look of concern on his face, so I was a little taken aback by the intensity of the "are you okay" question, so I asked why. This part is a bit religious. Sorry for the non-religious ones out there, only a small part of the story though. My friend's dad is a pretty spiritual/religious person, and when I asked why, he said that the other night he'd had the strongest feeling he needed to pray for me, and pray that my home be cleansed, that the evil presence in my home would leave. So about the time he prayed, that evil presence left my home. I started sleeping through the night, which brings me to the next part of the story. In the apartment above me, there lived a crazy person. Well, maybe she wasn't crazy, but it kind of seemed like she was. An older woman in her 60s. I would hear her pacing the floor and talking all night long, not every night, but a lot. At first I thought she was watching TV, but then I realized it was a single voice, never background music. And when she would talk in the bathroom, I could hear her conversations. Gotta love them walls and apartment living, am I right? I should mention she lived alone. And when she would have these conversations, there was never any other voice, just her. So I assumed she spoke to herself all night long. Fast forward 6 months, when the lady upstairs moved out, her family actually came and moved her out suddenly. Finally, I would be able to sleep without hearing her talk to herself all night. By this time I had a roommate, and my roommate had a dog. A few days after the lady upstairs moved out, the dog stopped going into my roommate's room and would freak out in the hallway if you left her there at night. I now sleep with my door closed, because I had a roommate and her dog, so I didn't witness the freakouts at first. Normally during the day, the dog would sit in the window of my roommate's room and watch the people go by basically all day long. Now suddenly she wouldn't go into my roommate's room, and when she was in the hallway she would cry and scratch on my door to be let in. At night she would normally sleep in my roommate's room, but suddenly she wouldn't, and if you forced her you would literally have to drag her in, and then she would scratch and cry to leave. I started to feel like I was being watched when I showered, or would feel like someone else was in the room when no one was. That's when I noticed the man in the hallway was back. I never told my roommate about my previous experiences with the man in the hallway, until she brought up that she started feeling weird at night, and would wake up night after night. If you don't want roommates to pick up and leave, you don't tell them ghost stories have happened in your house. So that's when I told her about the man in the hallway, and when we called my friend's dad. My friend's dad came over, blessed the house, and we didn't have any issues after that. The dog went back to hanging out by the window all day. A few days after the guy in the hallway stopped showing up, my roommate started sleeping through the night again. My theory is the man in the hallway left my place and went upstairs, and that's who the lady upstairs was speaking to all night long, and why her family freaked out and moved her suddenly. Once she left, he came back down to mine, till he got booted. The question is, where did he go? My home has been haunted since the day I moved in. I'm a Wiccan, and I know this can stir up energies and stuff. So my home, before it was made into flats, has been many things. It has been a theatre, a town hall, a clothing factory, and a nightclub, which burnt down apart from the outer walls, which were then used for the exterior of the flats, one of which I live in. We have had minor disturbances due to spiritual activity. Some activity feels okay, while others are negative. One room in particular feels bad. When my husband moved in, he had always flatly refused to sleep there. So, a few years after meeting my husband, I fell pregnant, which in itself had some odd occurrences. Time moves on, and we needed to prepare the room for the baby. We live in a 2-bedroom flat, so my boy had to sleep in that room where my husband refuses to sleep. My baby boy is born and seems really happy. There were a few occasions where things happened. Once he was in his high chair and pointed to a point where there was no one and said, "Man, coming." This totally freaked out my husband. Over the years, instead of my boy wanting to spend more time in his room, he has spent less time in it. Bedtimes were always a battle, as they are for most parents. But for us it was worse, as he would flatly refuse to sleep in his room, to the point where my husband would have to carry him or bodily walk him down the hallway. So my friend and her daughter came over for the day. The children begged us for a sleepover, to which we reluctantly agreed. The children played all day, but at one point they opened the loft which is in his room. They both said they felt a very cold wind come out of it. We as parents told them not to play with the loft, as it could be dangerous, as most parents probably would say. Dinner time comes, the kids have takeaway and a movie, and the evening moves on uneventfully. So getting near bedtime, we wanted the children in separate beds due to age and being a boy and a girl, so we pulled out the sofa bed so that my friend and her daughter could sleep there. The children had other ideas, and were play fighting on it, and then laying on it watching TV. We told them after time that this cannot happen, and in the end they agreed with my friend sleeping with her daughter, and my boy would sleep on the other side of the sofa. Time moves on. It's getting later and later, and as kids do on sleepovers, they didn't want to sleep, but eventually did. My friend had brought some wine over and suggested we go into my boy's room for a few drinks. Not so many we couldn't deal with the kids, but enough to get us giggly. So we sat in my son's bottom bunk with our drinks and some sweets. The mattress was normally nice and soft, but we felt it harden and felt like someone was pushing it from underneath. There was no gap under the bed where anyone could get under. It felt like the mattress was being lifted. My friend screamed. She saw a man in a black suit with a top hat and a cane, which stood at the end of the bed near her. We got off the bed like a shot. We then called upon Archangel Michael, who normally always heard your call, but at night he didn't respond, no matter how hard we called him. My friend checked on the children and they were sleeping, but 5 minutes after she left the room, they rushed in telling us something woke up with them, feeling like they were being choked by a man in a black suit, which is what my friend saw. Not to mention the air in the room felt ice cold and had a bad smell. We ushered the children into the lounge, one adult in front and one behind. They sat on the bed and we told them it would be okay, but it wasn't. My friend tried to call or text a friend. She had no signal and credit, but nothing got through and her phone continued to play up. Anyway, back to the children. The entity followed us back to the kitchen and lounge, where once again it continued to attack the children. The girl said it had its arm down her throat and she could hardly breathe. My son was feeling physically sick and also had trouble breathing. It gave my friend awful stomach pains, and she felt physically sick too. The children drew the sign of the cross on a piece of card which they put on the wall, and shortly after this, the cross looked like it had been swiped off the wall and inverted. We also put frankincense oil on the children's heads, which then made everything go away. We then all stood up and told it to leave. We told my boy he had to stand up to it, and his room to claim his space back, which he did. Since then, my friend has been filling our home with light. I'm getting the house blessed and have put frankincense around the house. My boy, as of yet, has not gone back into his room. I'll sleep there first. But hopefully, whatever it was, is finally gone. I moved into my current apartment almost 2 years ago. I knew that something was here from the moment I walked through the door, but it didn't feel malevolent or anything like that. I've always been able to feel their presence, whether they be good or not. The first couple of nights after we moved in, I would sit on my bed and read or colour or just do something to ease my thoughts. I had just moved from a really bad apartment complex and it was hard for me to sleep at night for sheer paranoid thoughts because bad things would always happen in the complex I had moved away from. The apartment I had moved into was a nice, quiet neighborhood that was so small and rural. It was a big change, and very nice to be honest. I sat on my bed, usually looking down, and would see shadows darting across my doorway out in the hall. I would look up, assuming it was one of my daughters either going to the bathroom or needing something, but when I would look up, neither one would be there, and I had never heard any footsteps when I saw the shadows darting across the doorway. Also, at random times, I would hear footsteps upstairs. I know this could be the house settling, but it didn't sound like the house settling at all. I also have a sunroom that branches off my room, and during the summer I kept the door open with all the windows open in the sunroom to keep the air flowing to keep it cooler in my room. I'd also hear footsteps in the sunroom too, and it would sound like things were shifting around a little, but nothing would ever be there when I would check, and nothing would ever be moved either. It is really easy to hear my sister-in-law and her family walking around on the other side, but not like the steps I'd hear in the sunroom. After about a week of this happening, I was sitting awake in my chair in front of my computer, staring off into space. I was tired because even though this was happening, I had been sleeping better because I felt safer. When my husband came home, he asked me what was wrong. I told him, "You'll think I'm crazy, but I keep seeing shadows darting in the hall." I don't know if he believed me, but he didn't really say anything after I said that, and I went to bed. Something else that used to happen was that the smoke alarms would go off at random times. The one on the doorway going into the kitchen was battery operated, and the one in my room and my daughter's room were one of the ones that were supposed to last 10 years, and if you deactivated them, you couldn't use them again. So for a couple of months, one or the other would go off for no reason. It happened multiple times a day, and I was running around like crazy. I finally got annoyed enough and popped the battery out of the one in the doorway going to the kitchen and left the battery out for a while. It continued to go off the one in my room, as well as the one in my daughter's room. Now these alarms are supposed to let you know when their lifespan is coming to an end, but when it goes off, it will literally say low battery in a voice as the alarm is going off. But it didn't. All it said was, "Fire," as the alarm was going off. I had thought maybe the lifespan of these smoke detectors were at an end, so I disabled the one in my daughter's room and looked at the date. It still had 3 years left. All that was left was the one in my room. The smoke detector in my room was still going off randomly, and I was exhausted and going crazy with the beeping of the alarm going off 3 or 4 times a day, and I had no clue how to fix it. I finally just got tired and yelled out, "Will you stop messing with the damn smoke alarms?" And it instantly stopped, and has never happened again. Since then I have replaced the smoke detector that goes in my daughter's room and the battery to the one above the doorway going into the kitchen. Even though I don't feel like whatever is here is evil, there are certainly parts of my basement that I do not like. I don't know how to explain it, but it just doesn't feel right. I told my husband about my feeling, and he told me that it was probably just the light casting weird shadows, because it was cut weirdly. But I have not felt that anywhere else in the basement. Maybe it's whatever's here's personal space, and I'm more than willing to give it to it. Maybe my husband is right. I don't know. The one time I was going to get my dog from upstairs because he needed to go out and refused to come down because we had people over, and he's very skittish of people who do not live in the house. I was looking up the stairs and I was going up them. The bathroom light was on upstairs, and when I got halfway up the stairs, the bathroom light shuts off. I really didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off. I've always told my husband about the happenings of the ghostly, as I call it. My husband is always skeptical. So on one of our game nights, me and his nephew would start talking about our experiences here and other places we've lived. I pointed a finger at my husband and said that he would never believe me. My husband then replied, "No, it's not that I don't believe in those kind of things, but there is probably a more practical reason than ghosts and spirits." I asked him about the incident with the smoke detectors. By the way, it never happened when he was home, and he told me that it was probably a coincidence, but he didn't know. I didn't believe much in just simple coincidences. More recently at night, I wake up to the sound of rustling, like someone is going through the things in my room. The first time it happened, my dog growled low, and I just rolled over and went back to sleep. I've had a few other instances where I woke up in the middle of the night to the rustling, and my dog doesn't growl anymore. I just continue to roll over and go back to sleep. I still see random shadows out of my peripherals, but I'm used to it, so it doesn't bother me. My dog will also stare randomly at corners and growl. I just ignore it, as whatever he is seeing isn't bad, and has never done anything bad to me or my family. So as far as I see it, it can stay as long as it likes. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you did enjoy tonight's stories. Please be sure to join me tomorrow for my birthday live stream. That'd be pretty cool. It'd be really fun to interact with some of you guys. Remember, it's going to be in the morning US time and mid-afternoon UK time, so just be around if you can. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I do like myself some haunted houses, as you guys already know, and I thought these stories were pretty good. If you have any stories of your own, you can always email them to me, or you can put them on my subreddit. Either are good. Alright then guys, I think I'm going to leave things here. Maybe we'll have Haunted Woods on Wednesdays to keep up the hauntedness. I don't know. Let me know down below. Would be nice. Anything else? I don't think so. Wonderful. Huge thank you to my members and patrons. You guys are the best. I love you guys. Thank you so much. And, I'm working hard on improving my Patreon. And if you want to contribute, that's always nice. But you don't have to. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow, hopefully. Stay awesome.